This is Whiskey Whereabouts. I'm Tim, and here in the US, we're just coming back from Memorial Day weekend, the unofficial kickoff of the summer season. And when I think of summer, one of the things I think of is grilling, barbecue, right? And cooking outdoors. And so I've prepared a list today of some whiskeys with some overlap with some of those flavors, some of those qualities, the smoke, the barbecue. It's the top 5 Islay peated whiskeys for the summer barbecue season, and we're starting right now. My whiskey journey has taken me to Scotland and back. I've explored whiskey education, tastings, and distilleries from Islay to Speyside. And now my journey continues here, with you, on Whiskey Whereabouts. Okay, so let's start with what this list isn't. This is not a list of the top 5 whiskeys from Islay. It's not a list of the best peated smoky whiskeys from Scotland. What I have done is try to create a list of whiskeys with some flavor overlap with these flavors we associate with summer barbecue, grilled meat, barbecue sauce, the like. And I've capped the price of the bottles at $100 to keep it budget friendly for your summer barbecue. And the last thing this is not is a list of whiskeys to drink while grilling or barbecuing. You do not want to be drinking cask strength whiskey over the grill. This is to be enjoyed after we have grilled, sitting down to enjoy the food, kick back with your whiskey, either with some of the overlapping flavors or complementary to them. So you know how we always start these lists with the honorable mention. There's always something that doesn't quite fit in the list for whatever reason, but we bring it up to start off with. And today I'm going to start with Laphroaig 10-year sherry cask. Now, I just recently reviewed Laphroaig Quarter Cask. If you haven't seen that, check it out. I'll put the link right up here. In that video, I talk about the difference between the 10-year and the Quarter Cask, and how I think the 10-year is a little out of balance. Even in the sherry casks, that medicinal is still pretty heavy. But what this Laphroaig is bringing is some of that smoky sort of Islay quality with the sherry. We're going to return to this because to me, sherry peated Islay whiskey is very barbecue friendly. If all the elements, the other flavor elements line up, you should get that sweet with that grilled savory. So the 10-year sherry cask is a 48% whiskey. It's much better presented than the standard 10-year. I think it's non-chill filtered. It's color added with all those Laphroaigs, and it's finished in Oloroso cask. This is a whiskey with the sweetness from the sherry that's going to evoke that sort of barbecue sauce to me, and the sort of more briny elements, that Laphroaig-y, not the medicinal, but some of the sea elements coming in, give it a kind of like a barbecue shrimp more than a sort of savory grilled meat element, but fits right in at the barbecue. Your mileage may vary with this whiskey. I think that the medicinal is a little out of balance, and I think it's overpriced, so it's honorable mention to kick us off. Starting off the list proper, and we're going to start with the whiskey that I'm sure you expected as soon as you saw the thumbnail. It is the whiskey that I think of with the most direct overlap with this type of flavor profile that's sort of savory, kind of grill smoke. It is Caol Ila, right? But there's the problem with Caol Ila, and it's that Diageo presentation, right? 43% ABV, it's chill filter, it's color added, it's overpriced. So why are we talking about it here in our list? Because it is about as directly sort of on brand for the type of whiskey, the flavor profile that I'm talking about lines right up with that sort of more savory, more grilled smoke, rather than what I think of campfire, bonfire smoke from Lagavulin. Here in Caol Ila, it's Diageo's sister distillery. It has this other sort of savory profile. And because of these problems with Caol Ila, we often reach for the independently bottled Caol Ila instead, right? We'll get properly presented Caol Ila. If you watch my most recent video about 25 facts about Islay, at one point I talked about the volume that they produce at Caol Ila, right? So it's a very large, they produce more whiskey than any other distillery on Islay. So there's plenty of it to go around, or at least there has been historically. There was some rumblings last summer, some rumors that Diageo may be changing its position and keeping Caol Ila to itself, whereby it would not be available in so many different sort of independent bottled versions. For now, it's out there. There's plenty of it if you go looking for it, labeled as Caol Ila, and sometimes labeled as something else. and maybe we'll talk about that again on the list a little bit later. Next up, it is Ardbeg, and I want to talk about the Wee Beastie. Okay, so the Ardbeg Wee Beastie is 47.4%. It's only 5-year aged whiskey, but it's non-chill filtered. There's no color added. It's been bourbon and Oloroso matured and married together. We do not know the ratio. This is a pretty strong entry level and good value whiskey that I also reviewed on the channel not too long ago. And it really has, especially on that nose, a real almost barbecue pork sort of presentation. Very strong with that sort of grilled element and that barbecue element. This is also a very, sort of budget-friendly whiskey that can be bought for less than $60. So, okay, earlier on the list, I talked about sometimes how Caol Ila is dressed up in a sort of different label and doesn't always say it's independently bottled. Caol Ila. I'm just going to make that observation, and then I'm going to talk about this next whiskey, potentially unrelated to that observation. It's Portiskeag. It's the 110 proof. That's what we call it here in the U.S. This is non-age statement Islay single malt whiskey from an unidentified Islay distillery. It's 55% ABV. It's not chill filtered. There's no color added. This one's bourbon matured. There is sort of, if you are looking for it, a sort of smoked, sort of savory element. Again, there's a lot of suspicion about what is actually in this bottle, overlapping with the sort of flavor elements, the smoke elements I was talking about when I talked about Caol Ila 12-year earlier. This is bourbon matured whiskey, so it's not going to have the sweetness with the sherry. Some people will say it's got a little bit more medicinal than Caol Ila has. It has a slight element that sort of reminds you of Lafroig. We don't know for certain what's in this bottle, but it's going to have that similar overlap and that type of sort of grilled smoke element. Really complimentary. Okay, so moving on, I want to talk about this whiskey, Port Charlotte 10-year, one that keeps coming up on the channel. I'm going to have to review this one since we keep talking about it. It was in a blind flight not too long ago. It's a whiskey that you're probably pretty familiar with. A very well-presented whiskey from Bruichladdich, peated whiskey, the Port Charlotte 10-year, 50% ABV, that Bruichladdich presentation, non-chill filtered, no color added. Of course, we've got bourbon maturation. We've got some French wine casks in the mix. We don't have that same sticky sort of sherry sweetness, but there is a sweetness element here. When talking about some of the more savory elements here, sometimes you hear like sort of maple grilled or these type of descriptors. This one is coming in pretty high on the list because it's giving a lot of elements. It's not, grilled meat barbecue sauce in a bottle. None of these whiskeys are. So this is a bourbon matured with some French wine casks that's going to bring in a sweetness. It's not that same sort of sherry, sticky brown sugar sweetness that's so overlapping, that sort of barbecue sauce, that type of thing. It's also not a very sulfury whiskey. They have very tall stills at Bruichladdich, and I don't think of this as a real meaty whiskey the way I do some of the others on this list, but among all the other notes sort of being played here and different sort of elements, there is at the bottom of the sort of experience a smoky element that's a little bit more grill than bonfire, fireplace, smoke. Okay, so before I reveal the final whiskey on the list, just want to remind you that you can follow along what's going on the channel on Instagram by following us at Whiskey Abouts. You can check out the shop at whiskywhereabouts.com. So where does that leave us after the sort of whiskeys we already covered on our journey? I've decided to, in the number one spot, put a whiskey that's from a distillery that we've already covered, that's already represented on the list. It is a high ABV whiskey, and it does have a sherry component, as I talked about before, bringing that sort of sweeter kind of element. I think of the sherry as overlapping with the sort of barbecue sauce and the glazes and the marinades, right? And it is a whiskey that I don't think of as having the exact sort of same profile overlapping with those savory meat elements the way that, say, its entry-level budget cousin that's already on the list has. But I think of it as really having a lot of the qualities that are very complementary to that flavor, bringing in the smoke and the sweet and a lot of other elements. So you've probably already guessed what whiskey this is. It is the Uigeadail. So it is the non-age statement, Ardbeg, 54.2%. Of course, it's non-chill filtered, no color added. Again, this whiskey has the sort of sherry, matured whiskeys in its vatting, unlike the Corey. I think it makes it a lot more of a sort of overlap here with the sort of flavor elements that we're talking about. I think of this whiskey sort of less as the perfect pairing to grilled barbecue food and more as the worthy sort of capper to this type of experience, right? The grill, it's the end of the day. There's no more grilling. The grill is cooling down to its embers. You're sitting back. Maybe the sun's down. Maybe it's going down. Maybe sitting under the sort of twilight. And you've had, so you're grilled sort of food, and now you're going to have this dram as a sort of a capper. It's a really sort of rich, 54%, really rewarding whiskey within this budget parameter, with some overlap with the sort of smoke elements, sweeter elements, and the sort of more subtle, but they're sort of more savory elements that are in the mix. There's a lot more going on, but in the mix for this whiskey. So that's my list of my whiskeys I think of as being really complementary to this type of summer sort of barbecue experience from Islay. If you have some whiskeys in mind that I have missed, let us know your favorites in the comments. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you press this big button right over here so you don't miss any of the future videos coming, and I'll see you on the next one.